Little humbled by the turnout. It's nice to see everyone. I did want to take a moment and just say thank you to everybody who has come. I know it's late. I know you're probably looking forward to beer and or dinner and or both. So I will try to keep it tight and keep it fresh. And then I anticipate, based on the length of my talk, I'm probably not going to have a ton of time for questions, so I will commit to being out in one of the kind of follow-up rooms if you do want to talk. Or I have a standing rule. I've already had one. If people have anything they need signed, anything at all, you just let me know. I did get a signed copy of Inquisition today, which is really cool. So I do want to say thank you as well to the Narrative Summit. I really appreciate the invite. It was amazing to come here. Of course, GDC in general, it's a pleasure. I haven't been in a few years. I had kind of a standing policy that I would tend to send more junior members of my team because I felt like they could learn a lot by coming here. So now that I don't have a team, I thought, well, I guess I'm sending me. I want to talk about trust. That's going to be the kind of theme that ties my talk together. And for those of you who don't know who I am, because Tom's that was a pretty weak introduction. By demand. So I used to work with BioWare. I was there for 14 years. I used to say I've been there, but I was there for 14 years. I worked on Jade Empire. I had the distinct honor of writing all the subspecies for Mass Effect. I got to write the first Volus, the first Elcor, and the first Hanar. That was pretty cool. Then I worked on all of the Dragon Ages. I took over as lead design in the last couple of years of Origins and worked on Awakenings and 2 and Inquisition. So I have a bit of a history. And what I want to talk to you about today is not kind of the basics. I want to talk to you about what I see, speaking as someone who's been a creative director, in terms of high-functioning writing teams. And that team doesn't have to be multiple people. It could be just you as the writer involved in a specific set of exercises. And the key thing you need to do is to establish trust with the team. And my job was, of course, to help the writers get there. And the reason for that is because people have a misconception. This may be a slide specifically designed to appeal to writers. But the simple truth is that putting sentences together is not the same as writing. It does not evoke emotion. It does not tell a story. It does not make you feel. And your job, if you're here at the Narrative Summit, I imagine, is either to feel or to figure out how people whose job it is to make people feel work. So I'm here to help you with that. I think that these are distinct skills and ones that the team may think they already have. And you, as writers, are possessing of some sort of secret mystery that unfortunately does not have the mystique of sculpting in 3D or coding really tight arrays or that kind of thing. So then, how do you earn the trust of a team? It's interesting. And the thing is, your job is to win their hearts and minds, right? And I think there's 3 critical things that will help you do that. The first is a schedule that understands and can survive the rigors of development. You need to be realistic about how much time you have and what work you can do. Okay, cool. A schedule that understands rigors of development. Here we go. Boom. A story with clearly articulated goals, right? What you may find is that your team does not immediately understand your genius. So how do you communicate that? And thirdly, you need to have processes in place if you want to be truly successful to help the team understand that you are committed to quality. Because writing can be weirdly non-transparent about this. Because again, everybody kind of thinks they understand how it works, but they don't. So my job, as I see it, is to come here and say, okay, I've led writing teams, I've been on writing teams, can I help you take one step further? And we're going to start with the oh so exciting subject of schedule. Properly pronounced. Asphalt. So the thing about scheduling is that I'm going to take some givens. I think that either you are already highly competent or you've attended enough of the well-paced and carefully curated Narrative Summit that you will be exceptionally competent by the time you finish your time here. And so you know how to track the velocity of your team. You know how much work you have to do. You know, okay, we're going to write, 400,000 words or some business like that. And you know how long you have. And as soon as you know all those things, in theory, you can make a schedule. But the problem is that the real schedule exists in service to downstream teams. And this, I find, especially when you're starting out, is something you don't think about. A writer can casually write, and then the universe explodes, and it turns out that's very hard to render. Downstream teams have to figure out how to take the work that you're doing and turn them into actuality, unless it is 100% reliant on words. If you are working in a text parser and are making an Infocom-style interactive fiction game, you may leave, because none of my stuff will apply. You are actually golden. You may do whatever you like. But the thing is that downstream teams, in anything beyond that, do have an impact on the amount of time you have. And you look at your schedule and go, well, we start production, then we finish production. I'm great. Things are amazing. And I couldn't have paid for a more beautifully timed laugh. Because the simple truth is that's never the case. In fact, what you'll find is that there are any number of downstream departments who have this kind of stacked dependency. Editing was something that we had a separate department for at BioWare. Maybe you don't have that, but you should look at editors, or you have to do the work yourself. That's going to eat some of your time. There will be, if you choose to pursue voice, there will be voiceover recording. That will be a significant drag on the amount of time that you have. Cinematics, of course, usually have a dependency on voiceover. If you're going to record stuff or do performance capture or anything like that, the cinematics team cannot begin until they have the text written, and then they tweak the cameras and other movement like that. And then for us, we would localize into 12 to 15 languages, so we'd have to translate it, then we'd have to record that, and then all of that has to go through QA, because we would sim ship. Now, there may be things that you're able to move, there may be things you're able to shift around, but my point is, more than anything else, is that your job is to understand how many factors live downstream of the work that you do. Because the real time that you have, as compared to this wonderful, magical blue polygon, is significantly shortened by the amount of dependency. Because even if you can parallelize, which again, we managed to do, this represents a BioWare schedule, but to do that required numerous producers coordinating the elements moving through. If you can parallelize, even then, there is a final piece of writing that you do that must still go through a pipeline where it touches VO and editing. Now, there are ways to mitigate the amount of time that you lose in the course of this process, which is good. That's absolutely good news. And again, I want to kind of share the stuff that we did to accelerate our writers, to give them more time, a little more leeway. The first thing is cinematics and performance capture, anything that had that level of dependency had to be written first or as early as was practical. Sometimes you need to get the character voice, sometimes you need core plot in place, but as soon as you could do this, the sooner you had it, because you want it to be early in the stream for parallelization. Major characters should have, at minimum, one significant piece of content written as early as you can if you are doing voiceover. Doubly so if you're doing performance capture. And the reason I bring that up is because they may not actually be the right actors. And if you don't have the right actors, they simply can't hit the notes you need for a specific character. You need to recast them, which is time that you will lose. The sooner you can collapse that waveform into a particle and turn it into reality, the better your production will go. If you can, and if you are localizing your game, which I understand not everyone will do, but 30% of Dragon Age's sales were due to localization. That's significant, millions of copies. If you can sit down with your translation team and help them to understand the why of your game and the purpose of your character, and understand intuitively why they sound the way they sound. Iron Bull is using humor to cover his deep dissatisfaction with his current state. Oh, well, that makes every translation easier because they understand the core fundamentals and principles. We would have our writers get onto phone calls in ridiculously early hours because our translation teams were in Madrid, and they would sit them down and go, okay, cool, let me talk to you about what Sarah means. She doesn't make any sense, and you're going to have to translate a bunch of dick jokes. Good luck. And if you can, if you want to reduce the amount of rework you can do, a thing that we invested in very early was having engineers create a live and aware set of data complements that said, if this thing has been translated or recorded, change its state. If I looked in the dialogue toolset that BioWare used, dialogue lines that were yellow or red were ones that had already gone down the pipe. Money had been spent to translate them or record them. If I were to change those, I was aware that that had additional cost. It didn't mean I couldn't, but it meant that I should do so only when it was absolutely necessary. And we had a whole process in which change requests would be put through. This line absolutely breaks the game, it's not being translated properly, that kind of thing. Yes, we would do changes, but each time we would have to bring potentially an actor back in and pay their scale wage for one line. That is expensive and something you want to avoid. So again, making the writers aware and being aware of the costs of that kind of thing is a huge gain to the efficiency of your production. The other big thing I think that affects schedules is crumple plans. Crumple plans, to my mind, are the worst case scenario that you plan for so that you never, ever have to use them. And I think, again, if we go back to the idea that you want the team to trust you, what you want to do is go and assume that you will lose, say, 1/4 of your production to some degree of rewrites, someone getting sick, staff loss, writer's block, or any number of other things. Inexplicable horrors from beyond, depending on if you're working on some sort of Cthulhu thing like Alexis Kennedy. If that's the case, then you then want to go and crumple further, in my opinion. And yes, this is profoundly pessimistic, but I've shipped a lot of friggin' video games, and after a while, it gets to you. The thing I think is that if you choose to build a game that is almost fundamentally built out of critical path, like core, everything is deeply, tightly enmeshed, I would call this like a Naughty Dog game, a game where like every moment has absolute significance. I think you should crumple even further and assume that another 25%, half of your production time, will be stuff that you're reworking and retooling. If that's the case, then you should scope according to, I have half the amount of time I think I have, because you will want to polish and refine and make that absolutely precise. That does not match what we do at BioWare, though. At BioWare, we tend to do a mix. And again, BioWare at its best, I was not always the most responsible, but the simple truth is that if you had 25% of your plan possible to be crumpled, and you had, 25% of your plan possible to be critical, that means it is absolutely important. If you don't get these parts, you will not understand exactly what's happening. Then you should have the remaining, let's say 50% of the game, 25% is lost, 50% is crumple. That stuff should be important. It should be thematically appropriate. It should be things that lead into your overall structure, but it could go. The best example I could think of a game that crumpled like this would be Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 had several beats that were necessary. You had to go to the Abandoned Reaper. You had to see the Collectors attack people on Horizon. Your ship had to be attacked and your crew had to be taken away. Those things had to happen for the the Collector, I guess, threat to escalate. They work for the Reapers, so, transient property. But essentially, transitive? Anyway, so essentially, those parts had to happen. But the followers each had an acquisition plot, and they had a loyalty plot. And any follower could have been removed from that game. You can't remove all the followers from the game, because it's not a suicide mission with a squad that you've built up if you have no one. But you could move X number of them, and it would be successful. That's crumple. That's where you have the opportunity to remove things and prioritize things and say the game could survive a collapse of scope. You don't want that to happen. But what I would argue is that by presenting a crumple plan and having one on hand is that it becomes less likely to happen. Because what you will find is that you have a team that registers that if I slip, if I spend 3 hours on Twitter, I'm at risk of cutting Morden. And I want to collect those motherfucking seashells. Mass Effect jokes. But that's the kind of thing you find. You will find that an awareness of what could go will actually catalyze a team and make them not want to lose it. But still, as a writer, you've said, I'm not precious. I have built a thing that can survive an impact in the same way that cars have crumple zones that keep the passengers safe even if they mess up the engine. Clear goals. These were absolutely critical, and this is something that I had to learn over my years because I moved up through lead writer into creative director, and what I quickly learned is that I would spend hours building this delicious, detailed story summary of 60, 70 pages, and weirdly, no one would read them. And that will happen. That will happen. And the simple truth is because your entire team does not have the narrative priority that you do. And I'm, again, saying you insofar as I assume many of you are at least interested in narrative due to the summit you're attending. And that's okay. That's okay. I think that the simple truth is that your job to earn that trust and have the team go, oh, I get it, is to condense and present. You need to be able to articulate what this game is about in less than 30 minutes. And that's challenging. But I will tell you that every time I have tackled that challenge, I have felt better about the game because when I couldn't do it, I made changes. I absolutely shifted the tone of the game because it was too hard to understand. And that is a really, really powerful exercise for you to go through. You want, as well, to make a quick, high-level onboarding presentation. You want to be able to bring a new member into your team. And again, I'm speaking from the context of Dragon Age was 240 at the end of Inquisition. But you want someone new to come in and be able to go, okay, here's what we are about. Maybe you won't have a team of that size, but imagine bringing someone new in and being able to take a half an hour and have them go, cool, I get it. It's valuable. The things that you would want to put into that presentation are fundamentally the themes, right? You want to know what this game is about. You want to know what thread binds it together. Mass Effect 2 was about closure. Before everyone went to die, the whole game, even the marketing campaign, was pitched as a suicide mission. Everybody wanted to go find their dad, mostly, or figure out other stuff that happened in their life, and they wanted to say goodbye. They wanted closure. Similarly, Dragon Age Origins was about sacrifice. It was about the nobility of putting the world ahead of yourself, right? Dragon Age 2 was about rebellion. The status quo did not have to stand. You could fight back. In a lot of ways, the fact that your story was already being told by Varric meant that while things were proscripted, you still, as a player, had the opportunity to fight. That was a big part of it. Dragon Age Inquisition, I don't even have listed on here because I'm scared to talk about it because people get angry at me. But let's be honest. It was about faith and what happens when your faith is challenged. The Iron Bull believed in the Qun. What happens when that contradicts his friendships? Everybody in Dragon Age Inquisition was challenged in their faith. And that's what the game was about. It was a theme that ran through the whole damn thing. And you want to know what your tent poles are. You want to understand what moments stand out. What moments could marketing, when they inevitably do, come to you and say, what are we going to show in the trailer? But you need an answer. You need to know. In fact, we got to the point where I would have the writing team find good quotes as they wrote them and throw them into a file because eventually marketing would come and look for moments. And those quotes had to be thematically appropriate. If we could find them, we would have them, and our trailers were that much easier to build. And you want to make sure that your moments are a range of things. You sometimes need spectacle. Hey, we exploded this castle that had another castle inside of it. Wah. Sometimes you want them to be emblematic. This is the moment when the Inquisition is first founded and they unfurl the banner while everyone looks really proud. Later, their home gets destroyed. Dragon Age. Or you want them to be evocative, such as the choral singing, right? As everybody sings The Dawn Will Come just before you find Skyhold. Those are moments. Those are moments that stand up. They're moments that help cement the flow of the game that you are presenting. And you want those moments to be available, and you want to be able to articulate them clearly. Because when someone new is joining your team, or a member of your team who isn't part of your narrative is listening, you want some things to stick, and high emotions stick. And then he says this, and then he says this, does not stick, ever, ever. And finally, because there are so many people dependent on characters, and again, this may be a BioWare thing because characters were my jam. But the simple truth is that you want the motivations of the characters. You know, who do they agree with? Why do they care? And who do they fight with? You want those to be easily, rapidly accessible. Right, Sarah, Dorian, and Iron Bull got along because they were basically Team YOLO. Vivienne, Cassandra, and Blackwall got along because they were all uptight, right? Like you want to understand where people overlap and where they differ. And that's the thing that, again, helps the concept artist, helps the character art team, helps everybody to get a better sense of who's happening. Because again, I fundamentally believe that the best stories are told through character. So, the other thing that I would recommend is that as a communicator, and again, we're going back to the idea of how do I get the team to trust that I am going to rock this shit, is essentially that you should get comfortable with speaking in elevator pitches. Because not everybody around you is going to be willing to listen to 15-minute explanation as to why something's cool. In our case, we would tend to find rapid ways to convey the feel that we were going for any individual piece of content. A vision touchstone is a really important thing to have because you want to know, wait a minute, are we delivering this thing that we set out to do? So as an example of that, in the Temple of Mythal, for anyone who's played Dragon Age Inquisition, it was basically our Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade moment. It was a moment in which you were finding a giant pool of water as opposed to a cup, and it had an ancient guardian as opposed to a knight, and you had to go through a series of traps. That was exactly what we were going for, the feel like this was a place for you to respect or desecrate, in the same way that the Germans desecrated and Indy respected and he succeeded. That was the note we were going for and the feel. And while, yes, that undersells exactly what's happening, it also is an instantly graspable thing that you can evaluate the content that you're building against. And when teams aren't 100% aligned on narrative, this is a shorthand that helps them get back on track. So consider it. And then let's talk about quality. This is a big deal because the biggest thing that you will find and that I've found is that your team will sometimes worry about the writing quality. And this was a BioWare thing for sure because, you know, a lot of people came to BioWare hoping that they would be involved in an epic story that would catch people's imaginations. We had a notorious technical art lead who'd be like, yeah, I worry it's kind of shit. And I'd be like, Ben, it's cool. Let me tell you what's going on, Ben. It's cool. I don't know if he's still here, but Alistair, who is my former boss, is in the audience and probably laughing his ass off right now. But the thing is that's a fair complaint. Tell me it isn't shit. Tell me it's good. Tell me it's going to be a thing that I can get behind. And again, I'm going to take some givens here. You guys know how to document plots. You guys know how to talk to QA. You know how to make bugs happen, right? Cool. Well, those are the basics of quality. But the thing that we did, and again, this is a thing that ties into a team. And I know not everybody has the reality that they get to work in a writing team, but still, maybe there are people who have a narrative interest. You can recruit to this. Is that the BioWare process at its best involved peer review, extensive peer review. The flow, as it stood, was that everybody involved in the peer review, and the people that would be invited would be all of the writers, if you had more than one, the level designer, the cinematics person, QA, especially if they were narrative-focused QA, and anyone else that was like of an ancillary department. Sometimes the voiceover director would be involved. Their job would be to play that content. We always tried to get it in engine if we could. If it was too early, fair enough, we'd do it by reading, but playing is always stronger. Everybody committed the time. We booked it in their calendars. We moved their Scrum goals. We moved their Kanbans. All that kind of stuff changed because we needed to make sure that this happened. And then we would bring them to a feedback session. And the writer who had written said content, because we did try to give ownership over large-scale plots, like I'm doing the Temple of Mythal, if that were mine, my job would be to come with a notebook and to not talk. And each person that had played that content would go through their notes. Some people had detailed, some people had less. And they would go through and say, I felt this worked, I felt this didn't, I felt this clunked, this didn't match my vision for what I think we were doing. Those notes would be hard to hear. Feedback is always hard to hear when it's negative. Sometimes, though, there would be like, this was hilarious, never lose this, keep this, change that, etc. Then we would go to the next person around the table, and that person would say, ditto X, ditto Y, ditto Z, or Z, I suppose. And we would go through, and they would ditto anything that had already been repeated. So the key was to keep everyone engaged because they could not repeat their notes, and they would give the feedback that was fresh. And the writer would write those down, but anything that was dittoed would get a tick. And the next person, and the next person, and the next person. And this resulted in what you found to be kind of a consensus level of feedback, where people were like, wow, 7 people agreed that this scene clunked. They didn't know what to do. They didn't understand the flow. This character seemed out of touch. However, all 7 people also thought this bit was hilarious. Okay, cool, we know what to keep, we know what to change. What was really intriguing about this, to my mind, is that it created a public commitment to feedback. It allowed the cinematics team or the level design team, other people from outside the writing team, to understand what was happening. Because not only would we write all those notes, we would then make up a plan and distribute it across the team to say, this is what we're going to do to fix the concerns that we identified. So suddenly, everybody's going, wow, cool, look at the writers. They are awfully mature in the way that they handle feedback. They do not live in an ivory tower. They are not precious. They want to make a good game. And that's how you build trust. There's a precise set of rules. There's a decorum. And everyone follows this decorum, because if they don't, then you have the danger of someone becoming snarky or kind of an asshat and going, yeah, well, it was stupid when. And no one wants that, because everybody's about to go through peer review. It was universally applied. Even the leads, if I wrote something, I'd peer review it, right? And I was not immune to criticism, nor should I be. Other stakeholders being involved was a huge win, because they would often suggest ways to achieve a goal that writing could only fix by adding more words. Hold on, I can make it clear that she is sad with tears and posture. Don't add more words to that. You can pull it out. Multidiscipline fixes are always the best fixes, because everybody plays to their strengths, which is why we actively invited other disciplines into the reviews. And like I said, the ivory tower stigma is removed. It is the best possible thing you can do to make people trust you. And we implemented this all the way back to Dragon Age Origins. We refined it through Mass Effect 1 and 2. We kept it up through Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. It is widely used to this day. I highly, highly recommend it. Your first peer review will hurt. They always do, because nothing's ever perfect on first draft. But getting the feedback of your peers and knowing that later you will get them back is possibly the greatest feeling, because it means you're all committed to an amazing game, right? And that is why we're here. So other teams led to multidiscipline solutions. Broadcasting the plan meant that people who weren't at the peer review still felt like a bunch of cool stuff happened. Holy cow, look at how good we're making this game. It's cool that the writers are doing that. And imagine, because I imagine some of you have run into those walls. Imagine the team saying you're cool, right? Sounds pretty neat. But for me, the thing that I thought was super cool is that it meant if you had a junior member of the team, they would hear the feedback of your Drew Karpyshins or your David Gators or Patrick Weeks. And they gave feedback. But someone new coming into the team would hear that and would be able to assimilate it and understand what was happening and understand why that feedback was being given, which meant that when they went to tackle their stuff would be stronger every single time. And the most important part to me is that the leads had to go through this as well. Patrick was usually the first one over the hill. He'd be like, I did some content, everybody, tear it to pieces. But you know what? He wasn't precious about it. And his writing is amazing. He's probably blushing right now. So all of this is me saying that as writers, you are magical, wondrous unicorns who can make people feel things that you want them to feel. That's a hell of a thing. It's a bit of a superpower. And people don't necessarily understand just how rare that superpower is, to use simple words to make people cry, or smile, or feel like maybe it's going to be okay, you know? And when I go to PAXs and I go to other events, I love things like PAX because they're fan-focused. And people come up and they tell me stories that make me fucking cry when I think about them. The thing that you can do is make their lives better. And I'm here to say that the best way to do that is not to just earn the trust of the team, but to be transparent and open, and then be vulnerable. Put your cards on the table. Tell them what you're trying to do. Even if there's a risk, they'll tell you you didn't do it. Understand that the feedback you get from your team is feedback that you can use to change, feedback you can use to improve, feedback you can use to hone your blade until you can drive it into the hearts of your players to the point where they are on Tumblr or Reddit and writing about how this fucked them up. because that's your power. But that power gets better when you work as a team and when you look at those multidisciplinary solutions. And the thing I discovered, because this talk has talked about lessons learned over 14 years of BioWare, is that I came into and almost staggered into leadership. Things were not great on Jade Empire, and they said, do you want to be lead writer? Lead Empire, huh? And I remember my boss, Kevin Martins, a lovely guy, asking me this at, God, I think we were sitting on a beach where his kids were playing in the water. And I was like, I guess. And I thought that I had to be all-knowing. I thought I had to be the guy who knew how this stuff worked if I was going to be lead. And over the years, what I found is that admitting that I don't know how it all works, admitting that I need to learn and that the team can give me feedback, and admitting that I want to hear where it is broken by being vulnerable is the single best thing I've ever done for my career or for the games that have my name on them. So what I would encourage you to do is make efforts to earn the trust of the team working around you. Tell them that what you do is not just put words into sentences, but you write. And then be open and vulnerable to the feedback that they want to give you when they say it's not working. Because at the end of the day, you will have broken the conditioning of society that says leaders must be imperfect and never questioned, all of that toxic crap. No, get out there, tell people you want to know where you did right and where you did wrong, and you will find that your writing team and or your writing self will exceed, because those are the missteps you want to catch. And that is probably the lesson that I learned at BioWare.